Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Arise with Sally Goodwin. I am really excited to see you all today. So excited that I didn't actually realize we were recording, and that's why I came on in a bit of a rush. But welcome back. And have you all grasped the full picture of the Bride of Christ? I hope so, the future Bride of Christ. And have you been chatting to Holy Spirit and speaking to the Lord and seeing where you fit and what it's going to look like and how it's going to work and all of that sort of thing? And hopefully any weird or strange expectations around Proverbs 31 have just vanished into thin air and you're over all of that. The Proverbs 31 woman, because now you know who she is supposed to be and what she's supposed to represent. So, how are you all doing? I hope you're so well. Thank you to everyone who messages me. Just a reminder that I have a brand new website. I have Facebook Messenger, Facebook, Instagram, email, and WhatsApp. So you can get in touch with me in any way you choose, whichever suits you. There are many, many ways to get in touch with me. So please do. I love hearing from all of you. And it's so good to hear testimonies and stories and questions. You know, I'm quite happy with questions. You don't all have to agree with everything I say. Just ask me and let me explain, you know. So today, my message is going to be just slightly different. It's still about the Bride of Christ, but it's slightly different in terms of it's actually a prophetic message that I feel God has given me. And it's a vision of the Bride of Christ for the season coming, the season ahead, the season we've stepped into something new, you know, everything that's been going on in the world, all that transition and shifting and shaking, you know, the shifting and the shaking probably will never end, not until the end, but the bride just transitions and steps into new seasons with the Lord. And so when I was just praying, when I was actually worshiping a while back, and God gave me this vision. Now, the vision of the bride that I've explained to you, the picture, you know, that I've explained that to you, the vision of the bride in her beautiful wedding dress, but fully armored up, you know, sword, army boots, AK-47 grenades, you know, beautiful, serene, radiant, but warrior, mighty, able to take possession of reclaim territory, take possession, you know, occupy, etc., as we've been talking about for the last however many episodes. And so that is the vision. Whenever I pray about the Bride of Christ, whenever the Holy Spirit speaks to me about the Bride of Christ, that's the picture that I see. And then a few weeks ago, I was worshiping one evening, and in worship, I got this vision of the bride. Again, the vision of the bride as I see her in this wedding dress. But when I saw her, I saw this, there was this mountain, and on top of this mountain, there was a forest, and in the sort of a clearing in the forest, the bride was standing, and she was leaning on a rock. And as I looked closer at her, I realized that she was exhausted. She was weary. She was tired. She looked quite beaten and bloodied and bruised and battered and just exhausted. And she was kind of resting on this rock, leaning on this rock, looking as if her strength was just fading and like all was lost. So I looked to my right, and as I looked to my right, the mountain sloped down like this into a valley, and in the valley I saw these hordes of enemy forces, and it was just more than I could count. It looked like millions of them. Just this valley was just filled with enemy forces. And as I watched them, I realized that they were celebrating. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating the fact that they had beaten the Bride of Christ, that they had won the battle, that they had won the victory. And I was in this vision, I was horrified, just absolutely horrified. And I turned back to look at the bride, and I said to God, Lord, has she retreated? Has she fled? Has she gone back? Has she fallen back? Has she left it to the enemy to just overrun? Because has she given up? and she looked so exhausted. But as I watched her, I was horrified. I felt almost panicky, quite anxious, about what was happening. And my brain was kind of asking questions the whole time. Has the church retreated, Lord? Has the church given up its power, given up its space, which it certainly has in history? But God's voice in my heart was just so clear, and I just got this sense of just this huge compassion for the bride, just that his heart was so compassionate towards her. He was just filled with compassion. He understood how she was feeling. There was no judgment, no condemnation. There was just this huge compassion emanating from the heart of the Father for this exhausted bride. And as she stood there leaning on the rock, and I was kind of getting a bit anxious, God said to me, just watch and wait. So I just stood and I watched her for a little while. And she rested for a bit. She seemed to sort of get her breath back. And then she kind of straightened up and she sort of looked back over the valley where the enemy forces were celebrating. And she turned back again towards the forest, the wooded area. And it was beautiful and peaceful on this mountaintop. It was, the temptation to just stay there in that space, you could see was incredible, to just rest there and to not have to worry about what was going on down there. There was just such a temptation to stay there. But as I watched her, she sort of started to stand up straight. And then she bent down and she picked up the front of her dress. So bear in mind, she's wearing this beautiful white wedding dress, okay, full length, train, the whole lot, okay? But she picks up the front of her vest and she sort of tucked it like into her underwear kind of thing, so if you're wearing a dress and you put your feet in the sea or something, she kind of picked it up and she tucked it into her underwear, and then she put her one foot on the rock and she started taking off her army boots. And I thought, wow, okay, like she's really given up, really this is just doesn't look good to me. But God had told me to watch and wait, so I watched and waited. And while I watched, she took off her army boots and she picked up a pair of running shoes and she put her running shoes on. Now, at this time, I wasn't sure whether she was running away. I didn't know exactly what she was going to do. But you could see as she kind of took that pause, as she breathed, as she stood straighter, as she took off these army boots and as she laced up these running shoes, you could almost see the strength just return into her. Just she started looking just more like herself and stronger and more warlike. And then she turned to face the valley where the enemy was still celebrating their victory. And she turned and she faced it. And I watched as she kind of just put this determined look on her face. And she tucked her dress up higher and she picked up her sword and she started to run down the hill, down the mountain towards the valley. And she started running. At first, it was, she sort of started off slowly, but as she ran, she just gathered speed and momentum. But there was a part of me that was like, Lord, there are millions of them and they think they've won. What is she going to do? Just her. But as she ran, she pulled out from the folds of her dress a trumpet. And she held this trumpet to her lips and she blew. She blew the sound of a shofar, a trumpet, all those things together. It was the most incredible sound. And as she blew the trumpet, just hordes of angelic hosts just descended out of heaven. Heavenly beings, angels on horseback, angels flying, warrior angels, worshiping angels, just the biggest heavenly host I have ever seen in my whole entire life. Just hordes of them. Golden, glorious, beautiful. And they just descended right down to where she was and they flanked her on either side. And they were now all moving at the same speed. And what happened as they ran into that valley, all of them together? The enemy thought they'd won. They were celebrating. So they were completely unprepared for the renewed, rejuvenated bride with her angelic army to come sweeping down into that valley. They were completely taken aback. They were confused, they were distracted, they were running in amongst each other, they were falling over each other, they were fighting each other. It was absolute mayhem. But it was like the bride and this angelic horde, they just moved through this valley. They just moved past all of this enemy, and they just left the enemy just like dust in their wake. And things like that, visions like that, you unpack those over years. Those sorts of visions, God speaks to you for months and years to come about that. I mean, he has unpacked that vision of mine of the warrior bride. He's unpacked that for me over a couple of years. And each time there's another layer, there's another meaning, there's a different aspect to it that he's wanting me to bring across. So I'm not saying that I have all the revelation for this, and I'm not saying that I know exactly, what exactly everything that the vision was supposed to entail, but I felt like it was supposed to be an encouraging word for the bride of Christ. Because, as the bride, as the church, as the body of believers, it's been a tough season. It's been a tough season, tough for the church, tough for each of us as individuals, tough for us as communities. It's been a tough season. And I think that there have been instances where we have all felt as if ourselves as individuals, but also the church has retreated, has kind of given up its rights and said, okay, whatever you tell us to do, we'll do it. There are different opinions on this, and different people feel differently about this, but it's been a space of just wondering, how relevant the church is and what is it bringing. And I felt God say that it is, it's not over. Like, this is not over. The enemy might think he's won, and he might think it's over, but you know what? He thought it had won when Jesus, he thought he had won when Jesus died on the cross, and he hadn't, and he's going to think that he's winning right up until the end. Even though he knows how the story ends, he keeps thinking that maybe he can change it and he can actually ultimately win, but he will never win ultimately. But in the meantime, there are battles that we get to fight along the way. So I think there were a few things that I just wanted to point out, just as an encouragement and as a prophetic word of hope for the future. So the first thing is just God's heart of compassion. He doesn't look at us and think, oh, good grief, why are you not, not that I'm saying he doesn't sometimes get frustrated, because I think he does sometimes get frustrated. He definitely sometimes gets frustrated with me. But his overall heart was just such compassion for his bride who had fought hard, and she was weary and she was tired, and it was like she'd had enough, And so that was the one thing that was just so real to me, was just how compassionate God is for us when we feel like we've reached the end of our tether. When we feel like we just can't anymore. He has such compassion. But at the same time, he just gently watched her and just breathed life into her until she could actually start to feel more like herself again and be ready to take on what she'd left behind. So just some of the symbolism in the dream that I found really quite exciting was firstly when she started taking her shoes off and she exchanged the army boots for running shoes. That in no way means that she was not going to fight. She was still going to fight. But the running shoes speak of acceleration. They speak of a season where instead of the fighting being like, one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back, it will be actually an acceleration. There will be an ease and a a speed to the warfaring and to the warring that will actually surprise you. So she took the army boots off, she put the running shoes on. Now shoes speak of inheritance. If you have a dream or God gives you anything about shoes, he's speaking of inheritance. And also covenant. You know, when Moses had to take his shoes off, his sandals off, that's when with the burning bush, and God said to him, "You're on holy ground." You know, when Joshua met the angel outside Jericho, and the angel said to him, "Take your shoes off, you're on holy ground." That speaks of inheritance. Moses was being given the Israelite nation as an inheritance to lead out. It was also a sign of God's covenant with Moses that he would go with them. Joshua was being given the promised land. He was being given Jericho. That was the Israelites' inheritance. That was what God had said that they would get. And it was also a covenant. It was God covenanting with them, saying that I will deliver you. I will take your enemies down. I will bring the walls of Jericho down. So the fact that she's changing shoes, to me, it speaks of a season where we're stepping into a new inheritance. It doesn't mean that you leave the old inheritance behind, but it means that God has more. He has more for us. He has more in terms of inheritance. The bride of Christ is going to reclaim more of what has been lost. Plus, it's covenant. He is covenanting with us and saying, I am going to do this. I am in covenant with you, and I'm going to do this with you because God cannot break a covenant. He does not break a covenant. We break covenants. We are unfaithful. He is not. So he will bring his side even if we don't. That is always something that is amazing to remember about covenant. Then the other thing was that the running shoes were mint green in color. Now, whenever a color specifically stands out to you, God is trying to say something. And when I went to look at what mint green means prophetically, it speaks of the breath of intimacy and fruitfulness that blows forth from the depths of the sea and from the depths of God's forest of trees of righteousness that bear leaves that heal nations. And then I realized that I don't know that the bride retreated so much to the forest as God gave her a time to pause, a time to catch her breath. He was breathing intimacy and fruitfulness over her and into her from the depths of his forest of trees of righteousness. That he was actually giving her an opportunity to just gather herself, to reflect on what the next move should be, to seek counsel from him, to change her shoes, to re-covenant with him, to stake a claim for the extra inheritance that he was promising or offering her. So that was the shoes. Then what amazed me was that she armored herself. Like once she was feeling ready to go again, she had sawed the whole bang shoots, AK-47 grenades, She was ready. She was ready. So it was like that breath of intimacy, that kiss from God had armored her up and fully weaponized her. And then she started to run. And then she sounded the trumpet. Now, about a year ago, just over a year ago, I have an incredible friend who's a prophetic intercessor for me. And she had this word for me, and part of the word was this trumpet, which is a symbol of, it's part of what God has called me to, is to be a trumpet, to speak, to proclaim, to decree, to declare, to put it out there, And so the definition of a trumpet is a symbol of authority and social standing, which goes hand in hand with the association with warfare. It drives out demons. It is the power which enables a bridge in the divide between two worlds, spiritual, natural. It is more closely associated with power than any other instrument. The power symbolism is closely related to wars and rulers. It also symbolizes faith and purity and holiness, overcoming challenges, and the best of all, it symbolizes the resurrection. So it's almost as though, as the bride blew the trumpet, she was decreeing and declaring with the sound that came forth from her mouth. She was decreeing and declaring all of those things. The authority that God had given her, the fact that she could war, the fact that she was symbolic of the resurrection of Jesus, because only through the resurrection of Jesus could there even be a bride of Christ. And it was that sound that summoned the angelic hordes that came down to support her. And she swept down through the enemy and decimated them. Now, I'm pretty sure that they swept over the next mountain and down into a valley of more, and it wasn't the final battle, I don't think. But it was a big battle. And I just want to say to you that this is a season, it is a time for forward movement. God gave the body, the bride, the church, He gave us an opportunity to pause. He used what went on in the world and gave us an opportunity to pause, reflect, seek His face, change our shoes maybe, pick up different weapons maybe, decide on a new strategy maybe. He gave us time to pause, to spend time with Him, to breathe in that intimacy. But that time is over. It is now time for forward movement. The church needs to advance. We need to move forward. And that is going to come for a lot of you through a sound. So, in Isaiah 22:22, it speaks about the keys of David, the authority of the keys of David. And often we see doors, spiritual doors, and then God gives us keys to open those doors with. But what I felt God saying was that there is a door of nations, a door to nations, of nations, because of is more of a possessive word than to. And the only sound that is going to unlock that door is the sound of the trumpet. And it's actually a sound that each one of us needs to make. And doesn't mean you don't have to go buy a trumpet or learn to blow a trumpet. But what I'm saying is there is a sound that needs to be released by the bride of Christ to blow open that door of nations, to take us in full forward movement into what God has for us in this next season. And I just want you to just ask the Holy Spirit what sound it is that you need to release. You don't have to be musical. It doesn't have to be a song. It doesn't have to be a trumpet, a shofar. It doesn't have to be a musical instrument. There is a sound that needs to come from your mouth that is going to open up things in the spiritual realm that wouldn't have opened up any other way. And you don't have to do it in front of people. You don't have to do anything like that. You just need to ask God what sound you need to release, and then release it. Do it when you're at home on your own and you have a chance. So there's no one to embarrass you or no one to make you feel weird. But that sound is going to open a door in the spiritual realm. It's going to engage you with a new inheritance. It's going to enter you into a new covenant. Not the old covenant doesn't fall away. It's a renewed covenant with God. And it's going to enable all of us as the bride of Christ to move forward, because now is the time to move forward. The time for hanging back is done. It's gone. It's over. It is going to be about forward movement now. It's going to be about churches without walls. It's going to be about being outside of the building and not on a Sunday, moving forward with God. And knowing that you are surrounded by angelic armies that are there instantly to assist you. Knowing also that the victory has been won. And it's when we think the enemy has won, the enemy thinks he has won, that is the time to advance. So right now, when the enemy thinks that he's just covering the earth with silence and masks and vaccines and darkness and political instability and stuff like that, we know that he is not won. He doesn't get to have the last say. We do. But in order to do that, We have to stand up. We have to make a sound, and we have to advance. So I just decree and declare over you right now the ability to hear the Holy Spirit clearly as to what sound it is that you need to make. And then also the courage and the boldness to change your shoes if you need to, pick up your sword if you need to, straighten your crown, and advance into the future the way God has called you to. And I'm excited to see what He does. Bless you all. See you next time.